Dr. Zach Adedeji, Deputy Governor Corporate Services, Dr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. Thank you very much, sirs. And the Deputy Governor Financial System Stability, Mr. Lamido Yuguda. And the executive of NFIE also here. Please, can we give her a round of applause? On behalf of our host, the Central Bank, in partnership with the Emerging Markets Forum and the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, we welcome you to the beautiful city of Abuja. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, may I still respectfully ask all of us to be upstanding for the national anthem of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to formally commence this program.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians old and proud to serve our sovereign motherland.
Thank you. Please be kindly seated. Thank you very much. To ensure a seamless, secure, and comfortable experience for everyone here in this room over the next 2 days, and as we step into the business of the day shortly, your safety, of course, matters to us as much as the conversations ahead. Your safety, like they say, is our first priority. And perhaps I would also say you are in one of the most safest buildings in the country. Please, a round of applause for the Central Bank of Nigeria. I will now hand over briefly to the security team for a short safety advisory. Please give your undivided and full attention. To take us through this is Mr. Danladi Obehi Omazopia, Head Security Research Division.
Thank you, Nancy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Central Bank of Nigeria. My governor, distinguished guests, I welcome you here to the Central Bank of Nigeria. Please take note of the following safety information as we proceed with our events. This auditorium has 7 emergency exits, 5 behind, 5 in front of me, and 2 behind. And this emergency exit, please use the nearest safe exits, which may not necessarily be the entrance you use to enter the auditorium. Bags, equipment, and personal belongings should not obstruct walkways, aisles, or routes at any time. In the event of an emergency, please remain calm and follow the instructions of safety officers, event officials, and emergency responders. Do not rush or return for personal belongings. Proceed orderly to the muster point and await further instructions. In the event of any medical emergency, kindly contact safety officers or event officials and you'll be directed to the sick bay for assistance. Our restrooms are located on the left side of the auditorium when you come outside of the auditorium here. If you observe any unsafe condition, notify the nearest event official or safety officer without delay. Safety officers can be identified by their high visibility orange or yellow vest, like the one standing on my right-hand side. Assist persons with disability, injuries, or anyone requiring additional support if it is safe for you to do so. Please remember, stay safe, stay calm, follow directions, and know your exits. Your safety is our shared responsibility. Thank you for your cooperation, and we wish you a safe and very successful event. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obehi, for that safety advisory. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we commence today's pivotal deliberations, permit me the honor to respectfully acknowledge and accord honor to the distinguished leaders, global figures, policymakers, gracing our hall today with their presence. I'll begin by acknowledging the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Senator Kashim Shettima, GCON, ably represented by Dr. Tokwe Fashua, the Special Advisor to the President on Economic Affairs. The National Security Advisor, Malam Nuhu Ribadu. Good morning, sir, and welcome. You know, when I saw him come into the hall, I was like, okay, we have the NSA here in the money building. Okay, I think we're safer. Thank you very much, sir, for coming. Of course, our host, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso. The Central Banker of the Year. Another round of applause. Another round of applause for yourselves, the Central Bank staff, when you're building. Make it louder. Yes. You deserve it. It's been a rigorous 3 years plus, so you all deserve it. The Deputy Governor of Corporate Services, Dr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi. The Deputy Governor of Financial System Stability, Mr. Lamido Yuguda. Good to see you, sir. Welcome. Members of the board and executive management of the Central Bank of Nigeria present, thank you very much. The executive chair of the Nigeria Revenue Service is no longer FIRS, I hope you know. I've been seeing a lot of memos from them, NRS, that's the new name. Dr. Zach Adedeji is here with us. Thank you very much, sir. And it's not surprising you're here. The Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, Ms. Hafsat Abubakar Bakari. Please, another round of applause for her. The NFIU has done a fantastic job with the Central Bank of Nigeria, you know, taking us off that list. You know the famous list now. We are out of it now. I don't want to talk about it, but thank you very much, ma'am, for coming. Members of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria here with us, thank you all for your presence. Delegates from other central banks across Africa and other emerging economies, we also welcome you. The Secretary General, Ministry of Economy and Finance, Togolese Republic, Mr. Stefan Akaya, former Minister of Econ, thank you for coming. Yes, over there, sir, thank you. The former Minister of Economy and Finance of Burkina Faso, Mr. Seydou Bouda, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming, sir. Senior government officials here are present. I also see heads of government MDAs, DG, DMO, that's the Debt Management Office, Ms. Patience Uniha. Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research, Professor Antonia Simbini, is also here in the room. Of course, we can't be here without economic research, so thank you very much, ma'am, for coming. The founding director and chief executive of the Emerging Markets Forum, Mr. Harinder Kohli, one of our co-hosts today. Thank you very much, sir, for coming. The executive director, Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, Dr. Chukwuka Onyewena. Thank you very much. The chief economist and senior vice president for development economics, World Bank Group, Mr. Ndemit Gill. I saw him earlier. Thank you very much and welcome again to Nigeria. Thank you. Esteemed representatives of international organizations, including the World Bank Group. I see a few representatives from the World Bank Group here in the room, African Development Bank, as well as the Afrexim Bank, that's the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, and other development financial institutions here, as well as UN agencies here in the room. Members of the diplomatic corps, representatives of the states here in Nigeria. I see a few representatives from states. At least I can say I've seen from Abia State, welcome, and other states here present. Thank you very much. The speakers, panelists, and moderators for the next 2 days, thank you very much for coming. Directors and senior officials of the Central Bank of Nigeria, you make this building tick. So please, a round of applause for yourselves. You make the governor and his DGs look good. Please, a round of applause for yourselves. Where are the directors? Yeah. Leadership of the Emerging Markets Forum here present, thank you very much for doing this with us. Leadership and representatives of the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa, CC, captains of industry, heads of financial institutions and private sector leaders, vice chancellors, distinguished academics, professors, I see a lot of professors in the room, and researchers, members of the Fourth Estate, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the 7th Africa Emerging Markets Forum. Your presence reflects our collective commitment to shaping resilient and prosperous African economies. You are all warmly welcome to the beautiful, serene city of Abuja. Welcome. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome you to the 7th Africa Emerging Markets Forum, proudly hosted by the Central Bank of Nigeria in partnership with the Emerging Markets Forum and the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, CC. Please give another resounding round of applause to these institutions, and most importantly, the powerful organizing team behind the scene that orchestrated this. Please, a round of applause for them. Over the next 2 days, this room will serve as the engine room for actionable policy, monetary stability, and transformative growth. The meeting point for foremost policymakers, central bankers, economists, development partners, business leaders, and thought leaders, united by one common purpose: to explore practical ways for strengthening resilience in an increasingly uncertain global economy. Under this year's theme, Building Resilience Amidst Geoeconomic Uncertainties, the conversations will challenge conventional thinking, inspire collaboration, and generate ideas that can help shape a more resilient, competitive, and prosperous economies. Distinguished guests, welcome to what promises to be an enriching and impactful forum. I am Nancy Nnaji, a broadcaster. I anchor the foremost Moneyline with Nancy on AIT, and it is my honor to serve as your compere for today's proceedings. Let us begin without further ado. To set the tone for our gathering and welcome you officially, it is my pleasure to invite a co-architect of this forum, Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwena, Executive Director for CC, to deliver his welcome remarks. Please let us welcome him warmly.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. His Excellencies, distinguished guests, Governor Olayemi Cardoso, esteemed policymakers, development partners, members of the diplomatic community, colleagues from academia and the private sector, ladies and gentlemen, I stand on existing protocol as highlighted by Nancy. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 7th Africa Emerging Markets Forum here in Abuja. At the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, we are honored to partner with the Emerging Markets Forum and the Central Bank of Nigeria in convening this important thing. This forum represents more than another conference on Africa's development challenges. It is a platform for strategic thinking, evidence-based dialogue, and policy engagement at a time when both Africa and the global economy are undergoing some profound transformation. We are particularly proud that this edition of the forum is taking place here in Nigeria and indeed in Africa. Bringing together such a distinguished assembly of global leaders, African leaders, researchers, policymakers, and practitioners is a significant milestone. It reflects a shared recognition that Africa's future must increasingly be shaped by African ideas, African institutions, and Africa-led policy conversations. We are deeply grateful to the Central Bank of Nigeria under the leadership of Governor Olayemi Cardoso for the huge support in hosting this event and commitment to advancing policy-relevant research and dialogue. I would also like to acknowledge the vision and leadership of Mr. Harinda Kohli and the Emerging Markets Forum for creating a platform that has consistently fostered meaningful dialogue between emerging economies and global institutions. At CC, the forum carries special significance. Our institution was founded by Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, whose lifelong commitment to evidence-based policymaking, economic transformation, and Africa's place in the global economy continues to inspire our work. Her presence in today's program is a powerful reminder of the role of ideas, leadership, and institutions can play in shaping development outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme that unites our discussions over the next 2 days will be timely. The global economy is experiencing one of the most consequential periods of transition in recent history. Geopolitical tensions are reshaping trade relationships. Supply chains are reorganized. Technological change, particularly advances in artificial intelligence, is transforming production systems, labor markets, and public policy. Climate change is imposing new economic realities, while tighter global financial conditions continue to challenge developing economies. For Africa, these developments present both risks and opportunities. On one hand, many African economies remain vulnerable to external shocks, commodity price volatility, inflationary pressures, food insecurity, and fluctuations in international capital flows. But on the other hand, the continent possesses significant opportunities arising from demographic dynamism, digital innovation, expanding regional markets, abundant renewable energy resources, and the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So the central question before us is therefore not whether the global economy is changing. It clearly is. The more important question is whether Africa can transform these changes into a foundation for sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth. So this forum seeks to contribute by answering that question. The program has been carefully designed to address some of the most pressing policy challenges confronting African economies today. Over the next 2 days, the forum will examine 5 interrelated research teams that address some of the most pressing policy challenges, accounting African economies, and offer practical, evidence-based solutions for sustainable and inclusive growth. What unites these studies is their strong policy orientation. At CC, we believe research must go beyond diagnosing problems to informing practical solutions and better policy choices. Collectively, the papers provide actionable to help governments, central banks, development partners, and the private sector to strengthen resilience, deepen regional integration, accelerate innovation, and advance inclusive and sustainable development across Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa stands at a critical moment in its development journey. The choices we make in response to global economic change will influence the prosperity and opportunities available to the future generations. Our challenge is not merely to withstand change, but to shape it. Our objective is not merely to build resilience, but to build prosperity. And our ambition should not be limited to adapting to the future, but to help to define it. On behalf of the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, I thank you all for your participation and commitment, and I wish you fruitful deliberations as we look forward to the insights and partnership that will emerge from this forum. Thank you very much. It is now my singular honor to welcome the CEO and Chairman of the Emerging Markets Forum, Dr. Harry Nakoli. Thank you.
Yuka, thank you very much. Yuka, thank you very much for those very nice remarks. Thank you for your introduction and a very good introduction to our forum. And after very nice introduction by our MC, I'll keep my remarks short. And I think I'll start by thanking our host, Governor Cardoso, for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for coming and giving us your valuable time. And I'll be remiss for not thanking your special advisor, Dr. Nikuru. She worked tirelessly in organizing many, many things, the program, but also transforming this conference hall for us in the last 24 hours. So thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to see so many wonderful faces in this hall, many old friends from our previous 6 Africa Forum meetings, but also many new faces, including young faces. It has been a challenge in the previous meeting to have young participants, and thanks to your efforts, Governor, your colleagues' efforts, but also the center's efforts, it's nice to see young faces along with many wise people here, and I look forward to our deliberations in the next 2 days. Let me say a few other things. This is our 7th Africa Forum meeting. This is our 39th meeting overall for Emerging Markets Forum. And Mr. Governor, I'm pleased to say this will be our largest meeting ever. There are many, many people from all parts of Nigeria, including many states, from such a large country, the largest country in the African continent, but people have come from all over the world, including my friend of over 55 years, Suman Berry, who was a minister in India in a very important position in India, but people from all over the world, including colleagues from the World Bank, Indermeet Gill, the senior-most economist in the world. We'll hear from him later today, but also in other sessions, and many people from Europe, from US. So we have a mix of people, political leaders, economic thinkers, heads of think tanks from Europe, etc. So I think we'll have a very rich meeting. So I want to add a few other things. That it's not only the largest meeting, but I think very rich meeting to focus on the African continent, which in my terminology, I've said in other meetings, is the ultimate frontier of economic development in the world, and we need to pay attention to the development needs and challenges of African continent. And I think Dr. Chuka has given us a very good, inspiring statement on what this forum should be focusing on. The program of the meeting in the next 2 days focuses on 6 intertwined issues, ranging of fiscal and monetary issues of interest to not only central banks, but development economists, but also artificial intelligence, which is a very important issue, urban development and jobs, where the World Bank has written a very inspiring, challenging study, which is a flagship report, which they'll be presenting tomorrow morning. So these 6 issues, I think, are very important. They interlink with each other. The papers which are in front of you are available on our website. We didn't want to print them because of many reasons, including environmental issues. So we'll invite you, unless you've already done, go to our website, Emerging Markets Forum website, and download those papers if you've not done so already. One other point, and that is that not only these issues are important intellectually, to think of development issues facing all of us, but please use different breaks, coffee breaks, lunches, dinners, to talk to each other, not only about substance before you, but other issues, learn from each other, teach each other, make new friends, and I'll be very happy if during these 2 days you make 1 or 2 new friends and stay with each other, in touch with each other. That's one of the benefits of our forum, and it's your forum, not our forum. So think in those terms, that this is not just a school, but this is an opportunity to meet new people and renew old friendships. So that's the message I want to convey to you, that this is not just a meeting in a seminar, but this is to learn from each other, to teach each other. Finally, in various sessions, we have these panels and speakers. You'll be seeing on the dais a total of, by my count, 51 people who will be reading and presenting.
Like to extend our appreciation to the Emerging Markets Forum for their consistent drive to convene these critical conversations, and to the Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa for partnering with us to bring this event to Abuja. The forum comes at a demanding time for emerging economies. Global trade is shifting, technology is reshaping markets, geopolitical realignments are influencing investment decisions, and climate pressures are adding to the challenges faced by governments and businesses. Emerging economies must manage these pressures while maintaining stability and building the foundations for future growth. For Africa, both the stakes and the opportunities are considerable. We have the world's youngest population, expanding digital economies, and substantial human and natural resources. But these advantages will not translate into prosperity on their own. What matters now is execution of sound policy, disciplined institutions, and the willingness to confront difficult trade-offs. Nigeria's experience over the last 3 years illustrates what difficult but necessary structural reforms can achieve. The foreign exchange market has decisively shifted away from multiple administrative windows and an incoherent managed regime towards a transparent, market-reflective system anchored on price discovery. Verified legacy foreign exchange obligations, estimated at over $7 billion, have been fully verified and settled. Electronic price discovery has been modernized through the electronic foreign exchange matching system. Monetary policy and liquidity management have tightened, and the financial system is being strengthened through higher capital requirements and net open position prudential limits. These reforms have come with adjustment costs, but they have reduced long-standing distortions in our markets. And under the previous system, where FX subsidies estimated about 3% of GDP in 2022. Since the reforms began, we have seen a narrowing of the premium between the official and parallel exchange rates, and also a significant growth in our foreign exchange, in our gross external reserves, which have risen to $52.52 billion as of 17th July, providing approximately 11 months of imports for goods and services. Net usable reserves have also recovered from $859 million in Q2 of 2023 to over $43 billion at the end of last month. Inflation has considerably eased, and real GDP growth has returned. Non-oil exports have increased by 38.7% year-on-year, and our average monthly portfolio investments have risen from $0.33 billion in January of 2023 to over $2 billion in January of 2025. Nigeria's experience shows that recovery is possible when difficult reforms are backed by consistent and disciplined policy. It also shows that no country can navigate today's global pressures alone, and that monetary and foreign exchange reforms, important as they are, cannot by themselves address Africa's long-term productivity constraints. That is why this forum is so important. Over the next 2 days, we will examine issues ranging from monetary policy and regional integration to artificial intelligence, urbanization, investment, and inclusive growth. While these subjects are distinct, they are connected by one central question: how can we build resilient and productive African economies that deliver meaningful improvement in the lives of our people? At the Central Bank of Nigeria, we recognize that sound policy benefits from dialogue, evidence, and engagement. Bringing together policymakers, researchers, businesses, and development partners allows different perspectives to be heard and to be tested, allows assumptions to be challenged, and practical lessons to be shared. I hope our discussions will therefore go beyond broad statements of intent. We should examine how reforms can be sequenced, how their costs can be managed, what institutional capacity is required, and how results will be measured. We must also recognize that every country represented here has its own unique economic and institutional circumstances. The objective, therefore, is not to reproduce solutions from elsewhere, but to learn honestly from one another's experience and determine what is relevant to our respective realities. I encourage everyone to participate actively, speak candidly, and keep the discussions focused on practical outcomes. The real value of this forum will be seen not only in the quality of our exchanges, but also in the ideas and areas of cooperation that continue.
You know, listening to those opening remarks earlier on, it became strikingly clear why we are all in this room today. When you look across the global landscape, the economic weather forecast, as it is, Deputy Governor Dr. Abdullahi mentioned it earlier. You know, the weather forecast seems to change every hour. We have high inflation here, supply chain bottlenecks there, interest rate adjustments, the interest rate on the remaining liquid contents by 25 basis points. That seems to me like what I hear at the MPC meetings. Effective immediately. And you know for sure that when you put this much economic intellect and titans in one room, the inflation rate in this building naturally drops. So after this meeting, I'm expecting inflation rate to naturally drop from 15% it is now to perhaps less than 10%. DG Dr. Abdullah, I hope you are listening, sir. We need single digits after this meeting. Of course, the theme for this forum, building resilience amid geo-economic uncertainties, tells us that it's about keeping your balance while the ground is moving under your feet. It actually also reminds me of a situation with 3 experts taking a balloon ride over the countryside, or a semblance of what we call our village. You have a meteorologist, a physicist, and an economist. Suddenly, they just had a thick fog rolling in, and they all lose their sense of direction. They were drifting downwards until they spot someone standing in the field below. They started asking for direction. The meteorologist leans over and shouts, "Excuse me, sir, can you tell us where we are?" The man looks up, thinks for a long moment and says, "You are in a hot air balloon, guys, approximately 50 feet above the ground." The balloon drifts away into the mist, and the economist turns to the others and says, "Oh, that man clearly was a monetary economist." The physicist says, "How on earth do you know that?" The economist replied, "Because 3 things are clear. First, he took a long time to analyze the situation. Second, his response was 100% accurate. And third, it's not even completely helpful to figure out where to go next." But of course, fortunately for us, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to map out precisely where we go next, focusing on monetary buffers, currency stability, cross-border payments integration, economic sovereignty, precision, proactive strategy, and robust policy coordination. That's what will carry our markets forward. And I want us to give all of us a round of applause for being in this room. Not just for, yes, please, a round of applause for Mr. Colley saying that this is the largest meeting so far. And that is one good thing about Nigeria. Thank you very much. And that brings us directly to our first panel of the morning. Okay. All right, while we wait for our panel, I would like us to get engaged, like Mr. Akoli said earlier. Let's interact, because it's really a day, or over the next 2 days, we'll be having our interactions. If we can interact with ourselves, get to know your neighbor, and most importantly, you can also follow us online. Our central bank on X is at CenBank, so you can get your devices now and follow. If you're not following the central bank on X, you can do that at CenBank, CenBank. Yes, that's CenBank on X. So follow Central Bank on X, of course, for updates from this event and for other insights from the Apex Bank. You can also follow CC on X. CC on X is C_Afrique. So please do follow us on. Please kindly follow us on social media, on X, on Facebook. Central Bank also has an active website, so you can also take a look at that, where you see interest rates. You see the indicators that matter. Let me also announce that we do have the restroom to the left side of the auditorium lobby. The restroom, that's the ladies and the gents, to the left side of the auditorium lobby. Okay. All right, and that brings me directly to the first panel of this morning. We'll be delving straight into one of the most critical topics facing our continent today: navigating global shocks, monetary policy challenges for African central banks. And this panel will examine how monetary authorities are managing imported inflation, exchange rate pressures, of course, foreign exchange management, and interest rate corridors in an era of unprecedented global headwinds. We have a stellar lineup. And to anchor our discussion with baseline insights, please join me in welcoming Dr. Victor Obo, the Director of Monetary Policy Department and Secretary to the Monetary Policy Committee at the Central Bank of Nigeria. He comes with more than 27 years' experience across the central bank and international development institutions. He has authored over 48 publications on monetary policy, macroeconomic modeling, and exchange rate dynamics. Please, a round of applause for him. Professor Ngozi Unisegbune is next. She is the former Director General of the West African Monetary Institute and currently serves as the Director of the International Center for Regional Integration and Trade Research at the Nnamdi Azikiwe University. She's one of our panelists with more than 3 decades of experience in monetary integration, digital finance, and regional trade. She brings valuable insights into policy challenges facing African central banks. Please, a round of applause for her. The next panelist is Dr. Stefan Akaya, the Secretary General at Togo's Ministry of Finance and Budget. Please, can we give a Nigerian warm of applause? He oversees economic policy reforms, budget execution, and engagement with international financial institutions. His experience managing fiscal policy and economic reform provides an important government perspective on navigating global economic shocks. Thank you very much, Dr. Akaya, for coming. Our next panelist is Dr. Tokbe Kolade Fashuai, Special Advisor on Economic Affairs to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, an economist, a chartered accountant, public policy expert, and author. He brings strategic perspective on the intersection of monetary, macroeconomic policy, fiscal reform, and economic development. Dr. Fashuai, you're welcome, sir. Mr. Chika Mbono is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of KSBC Advisory Partners and a Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICANN, with more than 36 years' experience in banking, financial services, and economic advisory, including leadership roles as Managing Director of Citizens International Bank and Assurance Bank. He brings extensive expertise in financial sector development and macroeconomic policy. Mr. Mbono, good morning, sir, and welcome to this panel. And of course, our next panelist is Dr. Rose Nkugi. She's the chairperson of Southern Voice and distinguished economist with extensive experience in monetary policy and economic development. She has served as senior advisor to the IMF Executive Board in Washington, D.C., a member of the Central Bank of Kenya's Monetary Policy Committee, bringing both global and African perspectives to the discussion on monetary policy and economic resilience. Please, a round of applause. Okay. Jumbo, yes. Steering this crucial dialogue is Mr. Seidu Bode. Please, a round of applause for our moderator, President and Chief Executive Officer of UBA Bank and former Minister of Economy and Finance of Burkina Faso. Please, a warm welcome to our moderator. Please keep the applause coming until he comes on stage. Let's give him a befitting Nigerian welcome. Thank you very much, sir. So over to the panel.
Thank you very much, Good morning. Let me recognize my deputy governor, corporate services, on behalf of all other protocols. So thank you very much. I think this is highly intimidating, being the first to make a presentation in this highly, organized program. And the founder, thank you very much for the great job. For want of time, we're going to highlight some findings around this topic, navigating global shocks, monetary policy challenges for African central banks. And you're going to find details when the paper is uploaded. What we know concerning shocks at the moment is that shocks seem to have come to stay. Because while you are dealing with one, another one occurs. So it's no longer about whether shocks will occur or not. The question now is how to deal with it. And so for the past few, years, we have recorded multiple shocks with significant impact on world economies. And for that reason, we have seen that in Africa, these shocks affect all economies, but the impact is uneven. And it's significant in Africa because of the globalization and openness of economies, the high level of integration. And these shocks are determined by some structural factors. And so how to deal with it is important to understand how those shocks transmit. That will give us some understanding of how to respond to these shocks. So we're going to follow this outline, and I have mentioned these shocks. In terms of typology, the major shocks that have recently occurred, talks about the COVID-19. In 2020, the Russia-Ukraine war, which affects supply chain, and particularly, and most recently, the Middle East crisis. So, in a nutshell, this paper wants to analyze the significant transmission mechanism through which shocks affect economies and the response of monetary policy. And then we're going to look at how effective have been monetary policy responses in selected African economies. So in terms of theoretical underpinnings, we look at the Mundell-Fleming trilemma, that's the theory of the impossible trinity, which we all know. And in addition to that, there's even the fourth one, which now makes it the quadrilemma, of course, adding financial stability. These are the theoretical underpinnings for the work. Now, we look at major shocks which are global in nature and are transmitted to local economies. And first and foremost of them is the monetary and financial cycles, particularly in advanced economies like the US Fed. Meaning that when the Fed adjusts its policy, how does it affect, how does it transmit to economies in Africa? We also look at commodity price shock, which is key because of the commodity dependence nature of African economies. And in this case, we isolate crude oil prices, which is a major shock. And then we look at health and supply chain shocks. Recently, we have seen that health shock is no longer only a medical issue. It carries its own macroeconomic risk because of its impact on economy. Then the geopolitical risk shock, of course, which covers geopolitical tension and fragmentation and what have you. And then we also isolate the pass-through through exchange rate channel, which of course is the channel through which all these shocks transmit. So our paper looks at Nigeria and South Africa. And the reason for doing that is because two of these countries rank among the major economies of the world, and they have contrasting fundamentals, macroeconomic characteristics. For example, in South Africa, what we have in terms of monetary framework is formal inflation targeting. But in Nigeria, we are currently transiting. So you can see the variation. Then in exchange rate, we have just unified our rates about few years ago, about 3 years ago. South Africa has been floating. The rand has been floating for a while. In terms of depth of market, the market in South Africa is deeper than that of Nigeria. Then in terms of shock exposure, we are exposed more to oil shocks, oil price shocks, food imports, and currency shocks, unlike South Africa, whose major exposure is around global risk. So this talks about methodology. I've already mentioned those shocks for want of time. We engage the global VAR technique to isolate and trace shock transmission from the global level to domestic level. We also engage what we call the local projection model to now trace those shocks along levels of horizons, how they affect the economy. So these are the equations. Let's quickly look at the results. In terms of results, we first of all look at how does inflation respond to U.S. monetary policy, modification or propagation. What we have found here is, this is the case for Nigeria. This is the case, the second chart is the case for South Africa. What we have seen is that when there is a U.S. monetary policy shock, a positive shock for that matter, what you have found out is that there is a fall in inflation initially, so the initial impact is a fall in inflation. But after a while, you see inflation rising very sharply in few months, and then it gradually declines. Now, in South Africa, what we have seen is that there also is a decline. The first impact is a decline, meaning that that shock affects both economies initially with an impact. But the rate of increase, the quantum and the severity of increase in South Africa is much more moderate than how sharp it happens in Nigeria. And thereafter, it turns negative. What this means is that the inflationary effect of U.S. monetary policy tightening is not persistent in both economies. However, the impact and severity is sharper and higher in Nigeria. So we need to look at underlying structural issues that, determine what this has been in the two economies. Then we look at exchange rates. And don't forget, exchange rates is crucial here because all these shocks we have mentioned transmit from the global level to domestic economies through this channel, the channel of exchange rate. What the numbers suggest to us is that in Nigeria, which is the first chart here, the impact record an immediate and larger depreciation in the local currency than what we saw in South Africa. The impact is much smaller initially. So the level of depreciation here is much higher. But there is a quick correction thereafter, and you see the impact stabilizing after a while. And again, what it means here is that we look at the fundamentals in terms of market debt through which this impact transmits. And then you will see that if you have a bigger market, you have a bigger, reserve level, you have a stronger, base and buffers, then it determines how far you'll be able to, respond to those shocks and absorb those shocks in terms of exchange rate. So this looks at the forecast error variance decomposition. And what we have seen here in terms of inflation and contribution to inflation, those components, shows that if you look at Nigeria, the data is showing that own shock accounts for 71.37%. And this is referring to inflation inertia. So the level of policy credibility and how much the economy and the people are able to, get used to expectation, in terms of policy credibility. This is huge because, again, that has to do with how much the economy and the people and businesses are able to trust your policy over time. In South Africa, own shock accounts for 76.6%. So this is a very key consideration that we need to look at. If you look at policy rates own shock account for 63.67%, while in South Africa, it accounts for 76.07%. If you compare the policy rate and inflation and exchange rate, it gives us an idea that focusing more on policy to respond to some of these shocks without looking at structural issues that will improve on policy credibility may be a wrong response. So it's important here to consider both not just the policy rate as a response to this shock, but also policy credibility. I'm running out of time. So this is exactly what we have found. But I want to quickly give us what this means. The implication of this findings, number one, is the fact that we should treat monetary surveillance very importantly, meaning that we need to look at how these shocks emerge. Number two, we also need to treat exchange rate as a central factor, not secondary. We need to treat rate policy and complement it with structural reforms, as is going on in Nigeria now. And finally, we need to know that monetary policy framework alone is not enough. It depends on how much you are able to, supplement it with reforms. That is the only way to be able to respond positively and adequately to reforms and to shocks from the external sector. I want to stop here and thank you for listening.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Victor, for your presentation, your very comprehensive presentation. So we will go ahead with the team. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists. Over the past few years, African economies have faced an unprecedented sequence of external shocks. These have included the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, escalating geopolitical tensions, disruption to global supply chain, tighter global financial conditions, and growing uncertainty in commodity markets. Policymakers across the continent have had to operate in an environment of extraordinary complexity. These developments have reinforced an important reality. African economies are more integrated into the global economy than ever before. Decisions in Washington, Frankfurt, Beijing, or in global commodity markets are increasingly transmitted to African economies through exchange rates, capital flows, commodity prices, inflation dynamics, and financial market conditions. The paper informing this session offers particularly important insights. By examining the experiences of Nigeria and South Africa, it shows that global shocks do not affect all African economies in the same way. Rather, the extent and persistence of these shocks depend on structural factors such as exchange rate arrangement, financial market depth, policy credibility, reserve buffers, and institutional capacity. Perhaps most importantly, the study suggests that domestic monetary policy alone may offer only limited insulation against external disturbances. These are the issues we hope to discuss during this session. I am delighted to be joined by an eminent panel of experts and policymakers, and I look forward to a robust and insightful discussion. So I will raise some questions. The first one to Chika. Who is Mr. Chika? Chika, okay. So the question is, the paper suggests that exchange rates have become the primary channel through which global shocks affect African economies. How should African central banks balance exchange rate flexibility with inflation control in the face of persistent external shocks? Chika, you have the floor.
Okay.
For 2 minutes.
I will answer this question with trepidation because there will be no quadrilemma or all these big theories in my own answer. I believe this is ultimately the question of balance. That's what I believe. Rather than choosing one objective over another. Because I believe that a completely fixed exchange rate may create temporary comfort, but can become extremely expensive to defend, always. On the other hand, I also feel that a completely unmanaged volatility creates uncertainty that discourages investment and then fuels inflation. So businesses do not necessarily demand a permanently strong currency. That's my position. They ask for reasonable, stable, and predictable currency. An importer can plan. I am closer to the street than a lot of people here, so I will talk like that. An importer can plan, an exporter can price, and a manufacturer can budget. A bank can lend, an investor can commit capital. Therefore, I support a flexible exchange rate system, but not an abandoned exchange rate system. The central bank should allow market forces to determine the direction while intervening to prevent disorderly movements that will destroy confidence. Secondly, defending the currency should not rely only on interest rate increases. That's my position. The stronger currency defense, I believe, is actually a productive economy. It's when the economy is productive, that's when it can defend the currency. Therefore, the more we export, the more we process our own raw materials, the more foreign investments will attract, the less pressure will place on the exchange rate. In simple terms, the best long-term exchange rate policy is producing more than we consume. Finally, credibility matters enormously. Markets can tolerate difficult news. They dislike surprises. When policy is transparent, consistent, and credible, markets become calmer. And sometimes confidence itself becomes part of the monetary policy. And that's what has led to the salutary impact and progress we've had in Nigerian currency stabilizing. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you so much. The second question is to Mr. Tope Kolade Fashua. And the question is, the paper argues that structural factors such as financial market depth and reserve buffers often matter more than the policy rate itself. Should African central banks place greater emphasis on building resilience rather than simply tightening monetary policy?
Thank you very much for the question. So to answer, yes, indeed, there are structural issues with African economies, and the paper has examined just the Nigerian versus the South African economy. The South African economy is a lot more integrated with global markets for historical reasons, more than Nigeria. But Nigeria is also coming up, dominating at least the West Africa, and of course, financial markets are also getting deeper. Now, so of course, economists will argue whether monetary policy rates are the real pressure point, because there seems to be a slightly unorthodox relationship between interest rates and inflation in Nigeria. The pass-through is not as direct as you would find in many developed countries. So we run a risk. We run a risk that we may end up slowing down growth or caging growth while we're trying to manage inflation. In which case, Nigeria has maintained a very tight monetary policy stance, interest policy stance in the last few years. And of course, the multilateral bodies, World Bank, IMF, continue to advise us to maintain that very strong stance in order to maintain inflation, to reduce inflation, and to be able to get to the target of single-digit inflation. But the point now becomes we need to ask ourselves some very cogent questions. We are a country run by mainly MSME companies, 39 million of them. The informal sector of Nigeria is the second largest informal sector in Africa after Zimbabwe. And we're talking about 55 to 60% of the economy is informal. How much of that is actually linked with the banking sector and with especially the credit segment of the banking sector? Of recent, we have seen the neobanks and fintechs making incursions into those informal aspects of the economy, but it's still at the level of deposit collection, facilitating banking for them, facilitating payments for them. Nigeria is not a credit economy as much, not even as much as South Africa, where you would still find many people holding credit cards. In Nigeria, very few people and very few banks offer credit cards to people. So this creates a conundrum because the central bank will be afraid to say, you know what, the Monetary Policy Committee, do we reduce interest rate? What if we do and inflation spikes? Who gets the blame, especially from a post-crisis scenario as what we are right now? Okay, so that creates a challenge for us. So yes, whereas we're still going to be keeping an eye on monetary policy rates, but it's a time for us to actually really consider the very structure of our economy and the peculiarities of our economy. We shouldn't be afraid to write our own history in real time. And in real time, okay, this is where our economy is. We had inflation spiking to 34.8% as of December 2024. A lot of that came from, of course, some of the issues in the global market. Russia-Ukraine war, spike in the price of commodity. That was when we realized that oddly 50% of our importation of wheat came from those two countries. And of course, when that happens, the thing also, there's a correlation indeed between the price of one major food commodity and others. So things like rice, like wheat, they move other prices as well in society. Maybe because people have to substitute, for other products like corn and maize when they can't get the wheat that they require. And so we had that scenario coming up in December 2024 before the rebasing. And of course, we've seen a moderation to 15 point, where we are right now, 16.67, I think. It went down 0.02% in the last, in June. So now the thing is to consider what to do with the economy, to say that, listen, the structure of the economy is still rather, not as sophisticated as what obtains in developed countries or even what we'll see in a country like South Africa. Some of the reasons, and I think I wrote an article on this, why inflation actually went down post-rebasing and was continuing on that downward trend was because of some of the rather unorthodox approaches that was taken in the market to reduce inflation. For example, when delegations would be sent to market unions to tell them not to increase prices, those things have effect in villages, in our little towns across the country. Because again, we had a scenario where sellers of goods can just get to the market and say, this is what I'm selling. And most of what Nigerians spend their money on remains in the seller's market. It is called seller's inflation. Piggybacking on the work of Professor Isabella Weber of Boston University. Most Nigerians spend their money on some food, a lot of food, some shelter, maybe they're paying rent, or they're building their houses from the scratch themselves. The mortgage market is still very, very tiny in Nigeria. Okay? Some food, some shelter, a bit of clothing, some socials, the school fees for their children, and their money is gone. In all of those markets, whether the food market or the shelter market, people are complaining about rents increasing now. Okay? Or the school market, education for children, people are price takers. Most Nigerians are price takers. It is what you see, you buy. And so we now have to think about the economy in that regard. Whereas we want to be able to have strong monetary policy and also begin to see how Nigeria can tend towards some of the other economies in the world so that by the time we tinker with MPR, the banks take the cue. If you reduce MPR, banks take a cue and reduce lending rates, which is hardly happens in Nigeria, or at least there'll be a lag. Or maybe for every 1% or for every 2% reduction in MPR in Nigeria, banks will probably reduce their lending rates by 1%.
Can you conclude, please?
Right, so in conclusion, essentially, thank you very much, but in conclusion, there's a need for us to own our economy, to own the structure of our economy, to own the stage at which the economy is right now, in order to make that choice between monetary policy rates and the other ways of tackling inflation in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I will call now to Mrs. Ngozi Enis Egbuna for the third question. The findings indicate that food price shocks produce surprisingly little direct inflation pass-through, despite their political and social significance. How should policymakers interpret and respond to this result?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me back home. This is my home. Central Bank is my home, and I am very comfortable here. Monetary policy is also one of the things that I did before I left the Central Bank. So the paper was very well written, very clear results, no ambiguity whatsoever. So from there, I want to just establish 3 outcomes that stood out for me. One is the fact that there's a difference in the domestic monetary policy multiplier, especially for Nigeria. And it was explained as maybe being a result of the debt of the financial system in Nigeria. And I said, yes, maybe that's true. However, we also want to look at the monetary program that we are using. How do we calibrate the velocity of money? How do we, even if we are doing it well, the velocity of money in the monetary program, have we calibrated it right? Especially given the high density and in-depth use of fintech, as well as the fact that money has increased, the velocity of money has increased exponentially since we embraced technology and all that. And then the second thing that struck me was the difference in the inflation variance between Nigeria and South Africa, and that it's a measure of institutional capacity and not monetary program superiority. So that made me a bit more comfortable, because I know how many times we have slaved in the monetary policy department to think of whether our monetary policy framework was working or not. And so it means that it doesn't matter the monetary policy framework that you are using, whether it is inflation targeting or hybrid monetary targeting. The most important thing is that it is not working efficiently for us, because the monetary policy rate is suspect, and then the policy credibility is also an issue, as well as communication of monetary policy. And so I want to shake the ground a little bit by suggesting that we bring out our own African-centric monetary policy framework. What's wrong with having a monetary policy framework that incorporates price stability? Yes. Incorporates financial stability? Yes. But also incorporates things like climate change, incorporate the informality of our economy, because it is very, very huge. And that is why probably monetary policy rates are not hitting the targets. And so that's what I want to suggest, that we can look at an African-centric monetary policy framework to see whether that might work better, because the traditional Taylor's rule seems to have fallen apart here. The paper also brought out the fact that monetary policy is not a silver bullet. And so monetary policy has to work with other policies, especially fiscal policy and monetary policy coordination is very, very clear from the output of the paper, from the policies that the paper brought out, that we need to have more coordination, even though that's happening now, but also to include things like climate change policies, to include things like informal sector indicators, to include indicators that would make us more resilient and ready to adapt, because like the Director of Monetary Policy said, global shocks have come to stay, and we should have resilient policies to tackle global shocks, because we are Africans and we always take the heat of the brunt of the global shocks. So coming to the food segment that I was asked, that is very interesting, and that we have always known in the Monetary Policy Department, because after all, if you're calculating the inflation rate in Nigeria, food price takes over 60% of the basket, and so it is all over Africa. So we need to have policies that would incorporate both diversification of our economy, and also to make sure that we conserve the little foreign exchange that we reserve. What is wrong with having policies that will encourage made in Nigeria or made in Africa goods? Consumption patterns will have to change, because mainly inflation and the exchange rate pass-through is a reality. So can we look at how to encourage African-centric goods and services to be consumed in Africa? Not that we will no longer import things, but we will import things that we need. And then finally, to also talk about the food prices in terms of diversification of the economy.
Conclusion,
we have been talking
please.
We've been talking about diversification of the economy even from the time I was in school in the 1980s. So can we now bring out practical policies to make sure that the economy is diversified? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. I will invite now Rose Ngugi for the fourth question. The paper highlights that monetary tightening alone cannot effectively shield economies from global shocks. What complementary fiscal and structural reforms should accompany monetary policy to improve resilience? You have the floor.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be in this forum today. I like where the presenter concluded the fact that you cannot just talk about the monetary policy without looking at supporting a monetary policy with broader reforms. And that's where I want to begin, and to say that if you look at the paper and the bottom line that comes out is that monetary policy responses actually are defined by the structural systems, the structural factors that are different across the economies. And the first thing that we get from the paper, and which also the presenter was able to bring out, is the aspect of monetary surveillance. I have realized that in Nigeria, it's among the very first countries that is integrating AI into the data management. And I'm bringing this one because you cannot do monetary surveillance without real-time data. And real-time data architecture comes in handy because you are able to track the emerging economic risks, and you are also able to do good forecasting for inflation, and also you can use the technology to also automate the reporting system, and therefore look at the screening risk, which means that you are able to embed also financial stability in that kind of reform. So I support the fact that monetary surveillance is critical, and this should come in with investment in real-time data, and therefore embracing new technologies, including the AI. The second thing that also I've noted as far as the Nigerian economy is concerned is that Nigeria is among the very first 3 countries that have embraced the central bank digital currency. And in the literature for the central bank digital currencies, one of the key things that is put forward in supporting the monetary policy is the fact that it tries to enhance financial inclusion, as well as lowering transaction costs. And in this case, it helps in strengthening the monetary policy process. This aside, the adoption of central bank digital currency is inhibited by various structural issues, including the fact that if we don't do much as far as the digital technology is concerned, then it becomes very difficult because of access and therefore use of this technology. The third thing that I also want to bring in is the fact that in the financial sector, there are very many players. It's not just the banking sector, which monetary policy focus, or central banks focus on more, but also there are money markets now. Everybody is going to money market funds. There is insurance companies, and also we have pension funds and the like. And I think that you cannot deepen financial market without having collaboration among these other regulators. So I would say that collaboration, or whatever they are called, colleges with all the major players in the financial sector makes a difference in terms of deepening the financial market. And in this case, you'll find that in deepening the financial markets. For example, you'll need to expand the financial instruments. And I like what my colleague here talked about, matters to do with climate change. And I also see that Nigeria and also South Africa, they are at the forefront of bringing in sustainable finance, which focuses on the climate change. And I think this is a way to go in terms of thinking about the banking sector, financial sector, and expanding the financial instruments that are very critical in building up the financial sector. Okay, I'll come back later. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now, I will invite Mr. Stefan Akaya for the last question. Looking ahead to a world of recurring geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruption, and financial volatility, what should be the defining characteristic of a future-ready African Central Bank?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the question. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you a lot for inviting me for this stimulating session. For this question, let me answer from a particular position. That's of an open, net importing economy located within a monetary union. If I want to synthesize my response, is to say that preserving fiscal space is therefore the true resilience agenda for African Central Bank. 3 points quickly I want to share with you today. The first point is, over the inflationary cycle of recent years, our union absorbed the global shock, and at approximately 1.5 times. But for the country close to Togo, with a floating exchange rate, this amplified it more than 5 times. The correlation between Togolese inflation and global inflation stands at 0.8. The shock is fully absorbed, but the Togolese inflation remained at 0.4% in 2025, despite the growth of 6.1%. This observation does not advocate for any particular regime. It identifies a function. Where exchange rates cannot absorb losses, absorption must be ensured by other means. That means through pooled reserves, strategic stockpiles, and fiscal space. The function remains the same, but instrument changes. The second point I want to share with you is the fact that, which is the most important on my point of view, is the fact that the paper reveals a disparity in financial depth between the two countries. I want to talk about Nigeria and South Africa. Credit to the private sector in Nigeria is 50% of GDP, and in South Africa is 80 to 90%. In our economy in the Union, we fall within this low range. This constraint is not dependent on the exchange rate regime. Togo and Nigeria share this constraint under opposing regime. This is the most direct demonstration that the regime is not the determining variable. An African Central Bank cannot presuppose its transmission mechanism, it must build it. The ways to do it is, some ways is financial inclusion by using digital, but also to strengthen our integration, strengthen the rules that we have built in the ECOWAS. My last point is regarding the food shocks. The analysis must be precise, definitely. The paper not only finds weak transmission, but also a negative response obtained through an assessment of the terms of trade benefiting the two economies studied. This competition does not exist, but a net importer without corresponding export. In Togo, food represents more than a quarter of the market, and the transmission is very real. When the exchange rate channel is closed, the shock is transmitted through inputs. Further internal research indicates that global fertilizer prices carry an advance signal about a year. So,
Could you conclude, please?
yes. My conclusion is that we should continue to build resilience before the crisis arrives. We should build it before crises occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, the floor is to the audience to raise questions, and the presenters, the panelists, after that, will try to answer to the questions. So, the audience, the floor is yours. Okay. The name?
Okay, audience, please a round of applause for the panelists, what they've done so far. So we'll be using the next few minutes for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, moderator, how many questions do you want to take? We have a large room, we can't answer all the questions, definitely.
So, depending on how many persons are interested in
asking
questions.
Okay, what we'll do, you raise your hand, introduce yourself briefly and your organization. Perhaps we'll take the first three.
Okay.
First. Okay. The ushers, where are you? Okay.
He is the first one.
So,
Here.
sorry?
Here.
Okay, here first.
Suman Berry from India, formerly with the World Bank and with a think tank in Europe. A very interesting presentation. And really, this may be more for the economists, but this is the economist panel. So the contrast that strikes me between Nigeria and South Africa, which were the two polar cases, are the assumptions that you make about the labor market. So South Africa has an unemployment rate of 34%, and they have opted for a floating exchange rate as inflation targeting would suggest they should. My sense from what the comments, I don't know Nigeria well, is that you are more like India, which is that you have a very large informal sector, and that therefore you are essentially a classical labor market rather than one with nominal rigidities. So against that somewhat wonkish background, I just wanted to ask whether you believe that responding to supply shocks with monetary policy adjustment, what is the normative conclusion of the paper? I will read it more carefully after this result. But the question, what strikes me is that the labor market characteristics of the two societies are quite different, and perhaps the researchers would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Next.
Okay, can I? Okay, good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair and the panel, thank you for great panel discussion and presentation, clear report. My name is Umar Njai. I am from Ford Foundation for West Africa. So my question is more about a reflection, looking at how does the monetary policy really coordinate with the various policy and the real economy. So, for instance, it's looking at that we were shocked and surprised by the wheat issue from Ukraine. How does it happen? We do not know our economy. What is really the problem? And also, how can we design the monetary policy when we know that our production, agriculture, and is not really up to the level that we wish, how that the monetary policy and the real production of the economy can be linked, what can be done at that level. Thank you.
Okay. Next.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Friday Ohuche. I'm the Chief Economic Advisor to the State Government. From the paper, and I want to say that I read the paper from beginning to end. What came out clearly is that monetary policy framework is not the issue. Exchange rate regime is not the issue. The issue is structural defects. That's what came out clearly from the paper. Now, the question is, when it is structural defects, how do we then address structural defects in a way that it can address the issues that are raised in the shocks? And I take one example, the issue of power. Because we need to understand what is happening in the productivity segments of our economy to be able to begin to model how we can actually respond to shocks in a way that we can insulate the economy from such shocks. South Africa, with their own problem, well, they have their energy issues. But here in Nigeria and many other African countries, how do we sequence our policies that address the things we have found out in the solutions or the papers the research we've conducted? How does governance prioritize solutions that come out of the challenges we've identified? If we don't pay attention to issues that have to do with power, issues that have to do with productivity now, not even in the manufacturing. Global theory is now moving from producing the manufacturing to producing the services. And these are the issues that can insulate the economy, whether because if it is not monetary framework, if it is not exchange rate framework, it is structural defects. How do we prioritize those things we've found out to be able to support what we are doing in trying to insulate those economies from the shocks? Thank you very much.
Okay, I will invite Mr. Obu to start answers, and then the other panelists.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, participants, for your inspiring questions. The first question talks about whether it's appropriate to respond to supply-side shocks with monetary policy and how far that can go and what the conclusion is. For us in Nigeria, and particularly in the central bank, we have dived deep into, interrogating the critical drivers of inflation along demand side and supply side, perspectives. And what we have found is that both drive inflation. And we've even gone to a level of quantifying by how much, the magnitude of contribution of this. So this put us in a good, position to be able to establish a threshold by how far monetary policy can go so that we don't over-tight. Because again, when you tighten when it is unnecessary, then you have a tightening inertia, so you run that risk. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, the act that establishes the Central Bank of Nigeria provide for advisory services by the bank to the federal government. That helps to now strengthen collaboration between the fiscal and monetary authority. So we try to address some of those critical supply side frictions through coordination, collaboration, with the fiscal authorities so that we identify those areas that contribute to inflation. The second question talk about how we can design monetary policy to interact with the real economy. And I think my previous answer, also addresses that. What we do, is this awareness that no single part of the economy, either fiscal or monetary, should operate in silos. So that handshake is critical. And this is one of such fora that we are able to see what we can do. So in Nigeria, we have various platforms where that interaction takes place. We have a framework that is in place that is trying to define exactly those levels of coordination to be able to see that monetary policy does not unduly impinge on growth. So that is it. The third question talks about, since the issue is not monetary policy framework or exchange rate, the issue is structural. So what do we do? I would like to say that the paper does not completely discount the importance of framework. Framework is still very important. Exchange rate framework, monetary policy framework is important. Implementation, effective implementation of those frameworks are also important. But the conclusion from the paper is that no matter how strong or effective frameworks are, if they are not complemented by strong structural support, then the outcome will not be as expected. That is the conclusion. So those structural issues are directly within the domain of the fiscal authority, but as I said, there is strong coordination between those arms of or tiers of government to ensure that those critical issues are addressed. For instance, we try to, at the Central Bank of Nigeria, we try to dive down to clearly identify critical fiscal structural issues that impede on monetary policy transmission, and then see how we can have a roundtable with the fiscal authority. And that has been very, very productive in recent times. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody between the panelists? Mr. Akaya and then Mr. Atogbe.
Thank you. Quickly, I want to give some insight about those questions. The second question is very interesting for our union because we have a common monetary union. So the monetary policy is common, right? So no country have an impact in the monetary policy because we design it together. So the two main policies that we have to drive the economy is the budgetary policy and the fiscal, the revenue policies. So what we have remarked during these shocks that we have those several years is when you coordinate very well the budgetary policy, you can arrive to limited the impact in our economy. The fiscal deficit is very important because during 10 years, Togo have a very good fiscal deficit before the shock. Before 2020, we were even positive because the deficit, we were at plus 1%. That's why when the shock comes, we have used this opportunity to face the difficulties around these shocks. So I think what is very important is to continue to be sure that we have a fiscal deficit policy that continue to be sustainable. The second thing that I want to also bring in the discussion, according to the last question, when you want to you don't want to make all the effort that being a public effort, you should continue to see how you can make the private sector performs. And it's what we have done in Togo, because in Togo, the business climate is something is very important for us, because we know that we have limited opportunity to fuel the economy, so it is only the private sector that can enhance and bring investment in the economy, and so that you can feel some difficulties according to some special issues like power. Because we see that the state cannot continue to finance power and make sure that everybody get access to power. It is the private sector that can do that, and you should have a very good transparency policy according to the private sector. That's the two things I want to add. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My response would be, someone said the response to shocks, how do we respond to shocks? And someone also asked about, don't we know our economy enough to have anticipated what happened when Russia and Ukraine? Of course, we know our economy. I mean, every economy has partners in trade. The people we import things from, the people we also export to, every economy. So, but this is the essence of global shocks. That when it happens, of course, we're trying to build the capacity to respond in a kind of economic jiu-jitsu. For those who know how to fight judo, you use your opponent's strength to overcome them, their weight to overcome them. So that's the essence of this gathering here today, to say how can African economies stop being responders to shocks and be able to use those shocks to power up themselves. So if you look back, for Nigeria, since 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, there was a shock. It was positive for Nigeria. And then we went on in the early 80s, there was a crash in commodities. If you look at, of course, let's fast forward to 2007, the Great Recession, the collapse of American financial markets, and of course around the world. And of course recently, COVID-19, and now the geopolitical issues we have. African economies have been responding so far, but the challenge is how do we use those shocks to power ourselves up? Of course, if you ask me, the simple answer that comes to mind now is that Africa must consolidate on this inter-Africa trade. And AFCFTA has been powering up, especially since the new issues around beggar-thy-neighbor policies and tariffs by the US government that they have been levying on different countries in the world. So our challenge is, number one, we consolidate agriculture, we move away from the Malthusian reality, whereby Thomas Malthus had said then that human population will grow faster than the production of food. And it was very wrong, because with technology, food production has been able to grow faster in most other parts of the world apart from Africa. And so we must move away from that. Of course, we are focusing on food security, food sovereignty in Nigeria, where it's a journey, not a destination. AFCFTA also. And of course, recently the World Bank actually said, they brought a policy in March, a paper that said that it is now okay for countries around the world to industrialize. And some people criticize them and say for 30 years we have told African countries that there's no need for industrialization. But what that says is that we must take the initiative. So, governments will come and go. The management of the economy is the constant. And to be able to, they say if you don't measure it, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Are we making progress? Yes. Is it fast enough? Perhaps not. And so, but we know our work is cut out for us as managers of the economy to continue to trade with the world, but to also find opportunities for industrialization, to solve structural problems like the gentleman from Abia State said. Abia is one example in Nigeria that have been able to take some hold of the power issue. What is almost obvious now is that every state must have to take control and solve that problem from the ground up. And of course, some of the states have been enabled as well, so that we can solve the structural problem before we start to talk about, of course, while the monetary policy people, which is the central bank, will also continue to do the best work that they can. So everything has to move together at the same point in time. But our work is cut out for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to take the second question and the third question almost simultaneously. For the second question, you asked whether we don't know our economy. Of course, I want to assume that we know our economy, but also to suggest that we have a commodity buffer rule so that we save up when we are having booms, and so that we can use it when we have shocks like this. On the issue of what we do about structural issues, structural transformation and all that, I would like to suggest that while not overlooking the monetary policy, we should zero in on measuring dynamic liquidity management, measurable dynamic liquidity management in monetary policy by looking at fintech, by looking at cross-border digital payment platforms and all that. And also to suggest that we do I know we are doing it now, but we should now drill down further towards shock forecasting and early warning systems. That way central banks should employ things like AI, assisted forecasting, high data frequency forecasting, payment system analytics, and things like that. I think that's the only way to get through some of the structural shocks, but beyond that is to focus on the private sector. Private sector, private sector, private sector. They are the ones that would bring us out of the structural issues and bottlenecks that we have. Thank you.
Rose, yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just want to respond on the issue brought out by the Ford Foundation, and I want to look at it from the angle of, practicing a monetary policy that is able to provide incentives for de-risking the informal sector, de-risking the agricultural sector, de-risking also our manufacturing sector. I think that may be able to connect us very well, bring a good link between the monetary policy and the production side. And of course, the two of them would work very hand in hand in terms of ensuring that the monetary policy meets its objective.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, not much to say. I just want to add that the expectation has been that central banks will perform miracles, and including making the rent fall. We know that monetary policy cannot produce food. It can't generate electricity. It cannot build the port, and it can't repair logistics. It can't secure highways. It cannot manufacture fertilizer. So monetary policy alone cannot solve inflation. It's like asking the goalkeeper to score the goals and still keep a clean sheet. It's not very possible. The entire team must play: government, fiscal authorities, private sector, and so on and so forth. And one thing I will say, if I might, the monetary policy is not successful when economies applaud it. I told you I'm from the streets, really. It's only successful when ordinary businesses can plan and invest and employ people and sleep better at night. And but we have one advantage, big advantage in Africa. We're not burdened by legacy systems to some extent. We can leapfrog what digital payments, mobile banking, fintech, regional trade, young entrepreneurs. If you build resilient institutions, I believe that today's challenges can become tomorrow's competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. The time is over. Then I will conclude. Thank you to the presenter and all the panelists. Thank you, the participants. Today's discussion has reinforced a simple yet powerful message. Global shocks are likely to remain a permanent feature of the policy landscape. While monetary policy remains essential, resilience increasingly depends on stronger institutions, deeper financial markets, credible policy frameworks, adequate reserve buffers, and structural reforms. The challenge before African central banks is therefore not only how to respond to shocks, but also how to build economies that can withstand. I think. Okay. I think it's over.
Please, another round of applause for them. Can you give a double-edged sword round of applause? We know we just talked about monetary policy, which is just one pillar, but the applause should be more than that. Please, a round of applause for them for that robust conversation. And let me also just quickly recognize representatives of the IMF, the European Union, the World Bank, government MDAs here in the room. I see NEPC, private sector organizations. NESG is also here. The president of the Nigerian Economic Society, Dr. Baba Yusuf, is here. We also have Seaman in the room. Thank you very much. FMDQ, financial market stakeholders. We also do have the National Coordinator of Nigeria After Coordination Office, Ms. Patience Okala. Thank you very much for coming. Let me also give this gentle reminder that the governor has just only stepped out to briefly attend an important official engagement and will be joining us soon. And of course, still ahead today is one of the most anticipated conversations of the day, our marquee dialogue with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, GCON. I can assure you to be well worth the wait. We have an exceptional conversation lined up on the future of global trade, economic resilience, and Africa's place in a rapidly changing world. So it's perhaps time for you to stay close. Don't just go anywhere yet. The best is still yet to come. Okay, the previous speakers, please, can you go over to the banner over there to my right for a photo session? The previous speakers on the monetary policy panel, please, can you rise again and go over there for pictures? Mr. Leko, please, can you raise your hand so that they will know it's over there? Thank you. Over there, please, can you go? Professor Ngozi Egbune, yes, over there. Mr. Chikambonu, please move over there. Dr. Akaya, Dr. Fashua, Ms. Ngugi, Mr. Buddha, Dr. Victor Obo. Yes, for those pictures. Thank you very much. While that is still being done, let me also remind you that shortly we will have our keynote speech on artificial intelligence. I thought I'd hear some kind of excitement in the room. Because we know that AI has become so advanced these days that some of us now ask AI for life advice, for business strategy, even for cooking recipes. You know, I should reassure you that through everything I have done today, what you have seen is entirely human. So it's the human Nancy that has been speaking with you in the last few hours. With just a little help from my cup of tea this morning. But on a more serious note, AI may be changing how we work, how we do a lot of things in the world right now. How central banks are even rethinking. How central banks are rethinking monetary policy, their digital currencies, and what have you. But it still cannot replace the role of wisdom, the role of judgment, the role of experience, and the value of thoughtful leadership. Are we done with our pictures? Okay. Those, of course, those values remain entirely human. And that is what exactly our next session is all about. That is what it will be examining. And in fact, I asked AI how to keep an audience engaged after the previous rigorous session on monetary policy. And check out what he told me. Keep the speeches short. And I told the AI, I'm not the keynote speaker. So on that note, let's, with a round of applause, introduce the keynote speech session. To be handling that, it's my distinct pleasure to invite again Mr. Harinder Kohli, the founder, director, and chief executive of Emerging Markets Forum, to handle that session. Please, a round of applause.
Is to press the button in front. The one in front. You show red light. Yeah, it's fine.
Good morning again. Let me invite Dr. Indermeet Gill to join me here. Indermeet really does not need an invitation to The Economist. He's a very well-known economist in the world. His formal title is Chief Economist and Senior Vice President. He's done many, many things in the world. He's a friend and known him for many years. People who study economics associate his name with the middle income trap, a term that he coined many years ago. To me, in his recent tenure at the World Bank, when he took over as the chief economist some 4 years ago, he has restored the bank's reputation as the gold standard on economic thinking, in writings, in his huge cadre of world-class economists for the best thinking on development economics, and his writings and his reputation, the World Bank's economic work, as writing as the very best work on economics. And Indermeet has been very kind to come all the way from Washington non-stop to Abuja to be with us for 2 days, to talk to you this morning, to give the first keynote speech. And then tomorrow night, he'll get into the plane again to go back to Washington. Indermeet, kindly come and talk to us about the subject. What is this animal called artificial intelligence, and what it means for development of the world? Thank you, Indermeet.
Do you want to sit there and then we
No,
go up?
I'll sit there and then...
Whichever way you like.
Yeah, better, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So first, thank you, Harinder, for that very nice introduction. Thank you to the Central Bank of Nigeria for this wonderful venue. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa. And thank you, most of all, thank you all for being here. So I'll be brief so we can soon have lunch. I think everybody is waiting for lunch now, and so am I. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence for economic development. So I'm specifically not going to be talking about artificial intelligence in places like the United States and China. I'll be talking about what AI means for low-income countries and especially for emerging markets. Okay? The work I'm going to summarize today is from the next World Development Report that is on artificial intelligence. I think it's called The Promise of Artificial Intelligence. It's a long and detailed report, and I'm sure that I will not do it justice in my summary. Hey, thank you, Governor Cardoso. Now I'm suddenly nervous. Yeah. I was very relaxed. Hello? Yeah, good. Okay. But though I won't do the report, though I won't do this report, which is very carefully done, I won't do it justice, but it will be released next week. So I hope that I will encourage you in my remarks to take a look at it when it is. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you several slides. I don't know if you see it there. Do you guys have slides? Okay, there you go. So I'm going to show you a bunch of slides, but actually the messages are fairly simple. It's just 3 main points, and the important points that you really want to remember is optimism, the second one is adaptation, and then the third one is selectivity in policies. So the main points I'm going to tell you is that people in developing countries should be optimistic about the potential of AI to do good things in poor countries, in middle-income countries, and even in the newly industrialized countries. Okay? So while you hear a lot of noise about the bad things about AI, that it might lead to mass unemployment, that it will lead to machines taking over humanity, et cetera, that it'll lead to greater concentration, those might be true for for the large economies in which those debates are taking place, but those are not necessarily true in poorer and developing economies, and I'll show you some evidence on that one. The second is that while AI has many similarities with earlier transformational technologies, these are called general purpose technologies like steam power, like electricity, like computers, like the internet, and so on, there are 2 main differences. And the 2 main differences are important for countries to figure out what a good strategy is. So the first important difference is that AI is coming faster than previous technologies, which means that you don't have a lot of time to wait and then become wealthier or have enough resources, accumulate enough resources to spend on advancing these technologies, okay? It'll be too late, okay? The second part is that the second main difference is that AI is much more context-specific than previous technologies. Like a tractor or electricity and so on was pretty much the same anywhere. But AI is much more context-specific. What does that context specificity mean? It means that you can't just adopt it and use it, generally speaking. You have to adopt it and you have to adapt it as well. So these 2 things, so if you think of a 3-pronged strategy, adopt, adapt, and advance, for AI, for developing economies, adaptation will be the big part of the strategy. It'll have to be because advancement is not possible and pure adoption is not effective, okay? Now, the third thing is that, but even adaptation is not that easy because it requires infrastructure, it requires skills, it requires all of these things. So you have to be selective in this. And basically, you have a choice between different types of AI. So there's generative AI, there's predictive AI, and there's agentic AI, right? So all of you know what predictive AI means. It basically forecasts what will happen. So for example, will Governor Cardoso immediately take seriously what I say and change monetary policy? Yes, okay. So I'm not going to say those two words again. Okay. The second one is generative AI, okay? And this builds on what is asked. So for example, you could ask, give me a summary of this session. That you're using generative AI. And then the third one is agentic AI. Because I told you that the World Development Report is going to come out next week, you can actually devise an agent that will tell you when that report comes out and send it to your email and summarize it for you, et cetera, et cetera. So that is agentic AI. And what we find is that a big part of what will yield the biggest returns in developing countries, for which they have the capacity to implement and effectively do so, is predictive AI. Okay? The second one is that there is a big advantage for AI in the improvement of the delivery of services. I'm talking about essential services like medical care, like education, like legal and judicial care, like agricultural extension, and so on. Now, these are bigger priorities in countries that are more agrarian, where you have many people who don't yet have these services and so on. So I'm describing a developing country like Nigeria or like India. So actually, the upside of AI technologies is also very, very great. But you have to be careful to see where are the returns highest in this one. And what we find through our work is that the highest are not in frontline generative AI. The highest returns are actually in back-end predictive AI. Those are things that developing economies actually have the capacity for. And the reason why I'm saying this is because they're already implementing these things. These are not pie-in-the-sky kind of predictions and so on about what works, what doesn't, okay? And now my colleague Kenan has told me that I spent too much time on the first slide, so I need to move on to the second one. Go ahead. Yeah, okay? The other thing, by the way, also, is that we are used to thinking about big investments being made in places like the US, in places like China, and so on. But that is not what is happening. That is not what is happening in developing economies. In developing economies, actually, a lot of the investments are much smaller. They're much more diffuse, okay? Now, there's an implication for this. If you're making big investments, if a company is making big investments, it has to ultimately show its investors that it's going to get this money back. How does it get this money back? In part by efficiency improvements. And that often means getting rid of expensive workers. So it is absolutely reasonable for workers in places like the United States and China to be worried that their jobs are going to go. It is reasonable because these firms are making big investments. But that's not the case in most developing economies. In most developing economies, things are much smaller. Okay? In most developing economies also, these technologies are likely to actually complement workers in small businesses, complement farmers in small farms and so on. They're far more likely to do that. Again, I'm not talking about conjectures, I'm talking about actual experience, and that's what we summarize in the report, okay? All right. Now, so here are the AI effects. I'm going to show you a few slides now. So the first one is there's widespread but misplaced pessimism. Tune it out. If you're a Nigerian, tune it out, okay? Because if you focus on this one, there is a danger that countries like Nigeria, countries like India and others will miss this industrial revolution, okay? And you have to remember, you have to just look around yourself and say, what happened when you missed the industrial revolution? You ended up being behind for 200 years. Can't risk it again, okay? All right. The other thing that you sort of see is that the world economy is not doing particularly well. Investment rates are declining, potential growth rates are declining, and so on. AI comes at a really good time. And I'll show you some estimates that AI has the potential for returning us to the levels of growth that we experienced before COVID. And actually, in the upside case, it'll actually return us to growth rates that we experienced in the 2000s. And remember, the 2000s were the golden age of economic development, okay? All right. So I'm going to show you a few slides. The first one is, if you look at this slide, you'll see that people in Europe and the Americas appear to be worried. They're much more likely to be worried about AI than excited about it. But what's really healthy is that you see in Asia and in Africa, people are more excited than worried about it. It is rational to be worried if you're a worker in an advanced economy, given the nature of the economy, given the nature of these investments and so on. It is also rational not to be more excited because the upside of AI for developing economies is massive, okay? Now, the other thing I want to tell you is growth rates. If you look at this, you actually see what has been happening to growth rates. So if you look at the world economy, it was growing at around 3.2% in the decade before COVID. And if you look at it for this year, we are predicting that it would grow at 2.5, okay? That's a big come down, right? If you look at advanced economies, that rate has gone from 2% to 1.5%. If you look at emerging markets and developing countries, that rate has gone from 5.2 to 3.6. By the way, we still have a problem here because take out the US from advanced economies, and that number goes from 1.5 to 0.9, 0.8. It's very low. Take out India and China from the emerging markets and developing economies. That number goes from 3.6 to 2.6, okay? So what will happen is that you miss out on this technology, and China and the US and perhaps India are going to do fine. They're the largest high-income country, the largest upper middle-income country, the largest lower middle-income country. They're going to do okay. The gap between them and other economies like Nigeria and South Africa will only grow. Okay? You can't miss this, okay? Now, so what we did do, by the way, was we tried to estimate what are the returns from AI, right? And of course, naturally, AI is not estimated with the same precision as electricity and ICT. But roughly speaking, if you look at the boost, the productivity boost that you got from electricity, it was about 1 percentage point of GDP growth, okay? If you look at ICT, it was about half of that. If you look at AI, under reasonable scenarios, it'll be something in between, okay? It could be on the upside, it could be as high as electricity. On the lower side, it could be low. But a lot of this, how much it actually leads to in terms of productivity improvements and so on, this is something that actually depends on policy choices. So this is not a given, okay? So for that reason, what we say is that one should try one's hardest to actually take advantage of it. Now, here's another reason why one should be less pessimistic in developing economies, much more optimistic about it. The chart on the left shows you what share of the jobs are likely to be affected adversely by AI. That would be replaced, basically, by AI. If you look at that ratio, that's about 10% of jobs, about 1 in 10 jobs in the poorer economies. And it's more like 30, 40% in the case of upper income countries. So of course, those countries are actually rationally far more likely to see labor force displacement. You will not see the same displacement. You're not likely to see the same displacement in most developing countries which are still agrarian, which still depend a lot on small businesses and so on, okay? The other thing that you sort of say, well, but they depend on small businesses. Small businesses are not capable of actually using AI. All our evidence indicates that in developing countries, we don't see that much of a difference in how likely small businesses are to use AI as compared to large businesses. So actually, there isn't grounds for that pessimism, okay? You should not think that small businesses, if you look at that, for example, on the right side, you actually see that those ratios are pretty much the same for small firms as well as large firms in developing countries. So one of the nice things you'll see in this WDR, in the World Development Report, is that a lot of this evidence is for developing countries, which generally you don't see. Those are not numbers on which a lot of debates are based. So in countries like Nigeria, this report should reset these debates, okay? And you should debate based on these technology, on these numbers. Now, there aren't as many numbers for these countries as we would like, but this is something that can be fixed too, and we will fix this over time, because not only is this a policy report, it's also a research report. Okay, let me go on. So again, like I said, I'm not talking about possible things. I'm talking about things that are already happening. So in agriculture, for example, in the Indian state of Telangana, you're already seeing the productivity effects. In the case of Kenya, for example, you find that using predictive AI technologies, the judiciary has actually cut caseloads massively. I mean, this is a big deal in countries like Nigeria and countries like India and so on. These are huge caseloads, and it looks almost hopeless that it'll take decades to sort of thing. It might take decades without AI. With AI, it could take just years, okay, or even months. And then if you look at Bangladesh, for example, you find diagnostics and so on. These are not, again, like I say, these are not hypotheticals. These are actual numbers, okay? All right, so what are AI strategies? What should they be? I'm going to quickly show you 6 slides, and then I'll stop. So the first one is, as I said, adaptation has to be the biggest part of this. And it's essentially, this chart over here summarizes the structure of the World Development Report. It looks at what are the things that you need, which essentially capabilities, concentration, and complements. What are the strategies? Adopt, adapt, advance. And like I said, the biggest part would be adaptation for most countries. And then if you look at the development effects, you actually see they're economic, they're social, and they're political. These need to be managed. And then the role of governments, and because we sort of spend a lot of time on this one, there are 3 chapters. First, governments as enablers of AI, governments as users of AI, and governments as regulators of AI. And I'll just quickly give you a snapshot of the findings, okay? So that's the part over there. So this, by the way, the chart on the right looks at World Bank projects. So we actually look to see what are government projects procuring in terms of AI and so on. So whenever we could get the numbers, that's what we did. And that's what I meant by saying predictive AI in back-end use, that's what seems to come out the most. That's what's most in demand, okay? All right. And so here is a comparison, by the way, of firms in the US as compared to firms in surveyed low and middle-income countries especially. And you find many more similarities between these firms rather than, especially the smaller firms, okay? This part basically indicates that, so a lot of what I'm telling you is based on a small set of rigorous evaluations and a lot of other evidence, which is more circumstantial, but we checked it to make sure that we are not getting ahead of the evidence here. But what we sort of find is that there is a need for much better analysis of AI-related interventions. This is underway too, by the way. This is underway at the World Bank. It is underway in places like Nigeria, India, and so on. And we'll be informed a lot more. The next one, there's always this concern that people have saying, well, if Nigeria depends on US technologies or on Chinese technologies, there could come a point where Nigeria ends up being held hostage, okay? Because the US might actually deny these technologies, China might deny these technologies. So, which means that now you have a choice. You either pray, which is not good policy. The second one is to sort of say, okay, you know what, I'm going to aim for sovereignty myself. I'm going to invest a lot. Most countries don't have the money to compete with the US and China. Actually, no country has enough money to compete with US and China. So the next one is actually, and this is the mainstay of policies in places like India and so on, Suman will know more But basically, what they're looking for is interoperability, so that you can use Chinese technologies, you can use US technologies, you can use your own indigenous technologies and all too. Interoperability is a far more practical and a far more effective strategy for most middle powers. Okay? You don't, right? Okay. Now, and by the way, pretty much every country is a middle power other than the US and China. So here you sort of see is that don't obsess too much with mandatory standards. Don't try to say, okay, how do I make sure that AI does not lead to adverse political impacts or social impacts and so on? How can I do that through government fiat? And last year we did a World Development Report on standards, and which basically indicated successful standard setting actually starts as a foundation of industry-led standards. So basically governments have to create the conditions in which it makes sense for industry to get together and set voluntary standards. And that is happening already, okay? And then on top of that, if you find that industry cannot solve these problems themselves and so on, then you think about mandatory standards. So here again, and by the way, it's far easier to help industry arrive at voluntary standards that they self-enforce rather than come up with mandatory standards which you then have to enforce, and you often don't have the quality infrastructure to actually do so, okay? Now, so what's the World Bank Group trying to do? So essentially what we have is a three-pronged thing, which is scale small AI, okay? Call this AI in a suitcase, or call this AI that can work with intermittent internet access, with not that much electricity, et cetera, et cetera. That's not enough, though. You have to invest in country capacity, and that's not enough either. You also have to sort of continue to build AI foundations. For a country like Nigeria, this is all three of these are equally important. I could imagine some smaller economies that can do with just one and two, but for a big economy, a big ambitious economy like Nigeria, you have to do all three. Okay? Once again, as I said, what we find in our World Bank Group operations that you already see in the case of education, in the case of agriculture, in the case of legal judicial services, and a whole lot of other things, you already see very promising applications of these things. So let me conclude with a summary again. AI impacts are not the same as in advanced economies. Don't extrapolate from their debates about what are the dangers and what are the opportunities in economies like Nigeria, in economies like Ghana, like Mali, etc. The second one is because AI technologies are even more context-specific than previous GPTs, it's not going to be just simply adopt. And you have too short time horizons or too much urgency to think about waiting to have enough resources to advance the technologies. Adaptation has to be a big part of it. This does not, for a big country, it doesn't rule out investing in advancing some technologies and all too, but in general, adaptation has to be the mainstay of it. And then finally, as I sort of said, is that the AI strategies require making some choices. You have a choice between generative, predictive, and agentic. Generally, predictive AI is going to lead to the greatest cost benefit. Then you have a choice between adoption, adaptation, advancement. Again, adaptation is the most sensible, the most feasible thing. You can be unregulated, or you can have voluntary industry-led regulations, or you can have mandatory government-determined regulations. Go for the middle one. And then you can be passive, or you can invest in interoperability, or you can try for AI sovereignty. Go for the middle one. And then finally, you can not invest in AI because you feel like this is not something that's beyond you, it's too mysterious. Or you can have small, diffuse investments, or you can have large, concentrated investment. Go for the middle one again. Okay? I'll stop here, and we can take some questions.
Thank you, Indermeet. It was wonderful, spellbound. I was looking around when you're speaking, people are hanging on to each and every word that came out.
So I've learned to be very careful about what I say in Nigeria, because the last time I spoke over here, when I went to the airport, the person at security told me, "Hey, I recognize you. You're Mr. Gill, and you don't know what the hell you're talking about." Okay.
But he was listening to you, right?
Yeah, he had been listening. He said, "I saw you on TV. You're totally wrong. I don't know what the government has told you, but it is completely wrong." Anyway,
Well,
so it went on like this.
But the governor came and he was listening to you, right?
Yes.
No, it was wonderful, really. And, I read a bit sometimes, right? And I've read quite a lot of things about artificial intelligence, and I use it. I use Siri, and I use Google's platform and GPT. But I must say, I've developed a very different perspective listening to you.
Yeah. I think you'll have to hold it. Yeah, now.
I pay for ChatGPT and I pay for Gemini too, and I use Siri, and I read quite a lot. And I must say, after listening to you, I have a very different and better perspective. And the main message I take, and I hope 200 people who are in the room have developed a similar perspective, that people in emerging markets have less to fear than those who live in the US or in Europe. And there are positive things and there are opportunities. That's the main message I take.
Absolutely.
And the second, time is short. Don't let the train leave the station. There's urgency. And the small suitcase that you mentioned, we have to keep in mind. But anyway, we have an opportunity to ask questions of Indermeet before lunch. So let me stop there. Who would like to ask the first question?
So, by the way, I presented this, I think this is the third or the fourth presentation of a report that we haven't yet published. But I presented this in China last week. And at the end of it, somebody summarized it really beautiful. Actually, I think it was Justin Lin who summarized it very well. And he said that if you looked at the differential between the richest country and the poorest country before the Industrial Revolution, the richest country, he said, was Netherlands, and I forget which was the poorest country. But he said it was like 4 times that. By the end of the Industrial Revolution, it was close to 100 times.
Yeah.
So the point here is simply, if you listen too much to those debates that are happening over there, one should listen to them. And, of course, there are some risks. Anything good comes with risks. So you have to be aware of those. But you can't let that risk paralyze you into inaction. So I think one of the things that and by the way, it has paralyzed some countries into inaction. Unfortunately, these are the countries that could actually benefit the most. So if you look at the poorest economies, I'm talking about the IDA countries and so on, many of them don't even have an AI strategy. And by the way, an AI strategy, look at that, it's not that complicated, It's not that complicated. It's mainly adaptation, and then you have to sort of see which kind of things. So that's one thing. But the point is, you miss this, and you're going to have you're going to be, 50 years from now, you look and say, what the heck did we do,
Or maybe 20 years, right? Not even 50 years. Well, I would not be here 15 years from now. But anyway, who wants to ask the first question? Please, raise your hands. One person here. Let's take 3 questions. One. There was another hand. Governor, you have the first shot. You paid for this. Let's have the governor ask a question, right? Governor goes first.
Thank you very much, Indemit, for that insightful presentation. And I think it helps to clarify some of the blurred lines, because my take is that not only in developing countries, but also in the advanced world, there's a lot of fuzziness around what is obviously a potentially highly impactful topic. And even when you listen, quite frankly, to some of the stories with respect to strictly the private sector and investing in AI, even that can be very discouraging depending on how you view it. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on something you closed with, which is strategy. You know, is there anywhere, and I take note of the fact that you said something is being published, you know, very shortly, but is there, how do you see that all developing to ensure that, you know, strategies, the appropriate strategies are properly articulated and absorbed along a wide spectrum?
So, you know, we actually did a mapping of all countries that had AI strategies, you know, which ones didn't have an AI strategy. I would have shown you that, but when I was about to present it in China, I was told that the map was wrong, okay? So, yeah. And there's no map on which the Chinese and the Indians agree on, by the way. so we can't actually show maps. But what it showed was that the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, many of them did not have an AI strategy at all. I think the exception among the low-income countries was Rwanda and perhaps Ethiopia. Okay? But other than that, there weren't any. Now, if you ask me, so if you ask me if I met Paul Kagame, could I give him a strategy? I could give him something that I say, okay, beat this, you know? Beat adaptation, beat mostly relying on predictive AI, beat relying mostly on voluntary standards, you know? And maybe you can actually refine it more then. But the elements of a strategy are right there for a low-income country. Now, as you climb up higher, you become more sophisticated, like Nigeria or like India and so on. More work is needed. But again, once you sort of look at these things, I mean, if you look at the, if you look at the concentration part, the capabilities part, and the complements part, if you look at these the three A's and so on, it gives you a roadmap and say, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. So, for example, the next time you talk to the minister who is in charge of the AI strategy here, I bet you could ask him a few questions saying, why are you asking the government to go whole hog on mandatory standards when that never worked? You know, why would it work now? Maybe he has a good answer, you know, etc. So that's the way I would do it. But the problem is that the countries that really need a strategy, because what a strategy does is it rules out certain things and it rules in certain things. And it makes things feasible. So even if you're the poorest economy on the planet, you need a strategy for this.
Thank you. Let's take the next question here.
Okay. Thank you for this nice presentation. And I think the AI issue is very relevant for Africans. And for me, the question is not whether we should adopt it. No, we should. I just I was in China, invited in a symposium, a Chinese university. I don't remember the name of the university, but I found out that they were using AI everywhere, even in farming. We went to visit a farm where irrigation, everything is controlled by AI. and ask the guys, how come you are a very populated country? You are not worried about unemployment that you will create. And the response that I received from them is that, why, if AI can increase productivity, lower prices?
Yes, yes.
That's the most problem for Chinese.
Yes.
It's not, getting job. It's getting a revenue. So for them, AI is an opportunity really to increase production.
Yes.
To also alleviate, the hardness of work.
Yes. Yes.
So
yes.
Therefore, they said it's a good thing.
I'll try to answer your question.
And I remind them that in Africa, before, you were told that anything that is capital intensive is not good for Africa. We should go for technologies that are labor intensive.
Yes.
And that was a mistake, because most of the labor intensive technologies did not work for long. Many factories that were built with the spirit of low labor, low capital intensity, they did not have a lot, because competing against higher productivity of import.
Yeah. So I had a lot of thoughts, but I'm forgetting them as you're.
Yes. Sorry.
So you have to end your question so I can give you my thoughts.
Okay. So it's just that what I'm saying is we are convinced. Now the issue is how to reduce dependency. Because AI, if we don't tackle it, if we don't do research on it, we will be dependent on other countries.
Yes.
So thank you.
Former Minister of Mali.
Yes, I know, he's a big shot. But, the thing is that the first one is, I think for Africa, everybody says, AI for Africa. Well, if you take a look at productivity growth across the world and see what has been happening, it's been coming down. It's been coming down in advanced economies. It's been coming down. I think there are few exceptions. One of them is India, I think, and a few other places. Why do I talk about productivity growth? Because productivity growth is a summary measure of the inefficiency or the rate of reduction of inefficiency in an economy. And the main thing that distinguishes emerging markets from rich countries is that they're inefficient. They're inefficient in the use of talent, in the use of capital, in the use of energy, in the use of land, everything, okay? Now, one of the simplest things is to say, okay, how do you increase productivity in agriculture? AI has a huge potential. And by the way, maybe other things have a potential too in agriculture. But if you look at productivity in general, if you look at productivity growth in general, declining growth rates and so on, there's nothing else on the horizon that will actually help to increase productivity growth other than AI. And AI is not a minor thing, it's a massive thing. So to the extent that you can increase efficiency through greater trade, well, the potential is not that great as compared to 10 years back. If it is demography, well, the potential is not there as much. If it's greater investment, well, the potential isn't there that much, because private investment is the other side of the coin of public debt. So if public debt is very high, private investment is going to be replaced. So you got nothing else, okay? And then you get this boon of AI. So the question is, how do you harness it, okay? And in agriculture, you can harness it. In medical care, you can harness it. You can do things you can tackle these big problems of medical care in rural areas, education in rural areas, huge backlogs in justice, agricultural extension services. These are core responsibilities of governments in most countries, in most developing countries. So in a sense, what it's bringing these new solutions. One has to experiment with them, but I would actually say even that, and so I told you, you have context specificity. Yes, which means that something that was invented in London or that was invented for patients in London won't work in Abuja or in Lagos. But it may well be that when Lagos comes up with a good adaptation of that technology, it'll work in Accra, it'll work in Abuja, it'll work in Kano. So you don't have to do it for every specific context, you just need to get nearer and nearer to it. So when India invests a lot in these things, it'll help in Bangladesh as well, and Pakistan, and Myanmar, and so on, you know? So I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, if one thinks about these things seriously, you see the risks very clearly because those are the ones that are being amplified in the debates in advanced economies. But the benefits are generally, there isn't as much of a light that is shone on the benefits, and that's what we tried to do in this report.
Thank you. So we have now 5.5 minutes left, if I'm correct. Let's take next question here. Please, kindly be short so that we have opportunity for more questions. Right there.
You have to be short because I can't remember the beginning of your question.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Nekle. I'm the CEO of OPay Nigeria. In your presentation, you mentioned that you're on voluntary standards and interoperability. You mentioned that this has to be something that comes from the market or from the industry. But we've seen a scenario in Nigeria where for the payment systems, where there is no mandating by the regulators of interoperability, it has not worked. Why do you think that AI interoperability will be achieved without mandating it? Thank you.
I'm not saying that all of AI's benefits will be achieved or all of AI's risks will be mitigated. But you know, we wrote a whole report about how standards can help, how standards can help development and how standards can hamper development, right? And what we find is that one of the problems is that the main difference between middle-income countries, emerging markets, and advanced economies are in there. Advanced economies depend a lot more on voluntary standards than on mandatory standards as compared to emerging markets.
Correct.
And emerging markets have much weaker national quality infrastructure, which is needed to enforce these standards. So on both sides, they're using standards too much and they have less capacity to actually implement
Absolutely.
them. That's one of the things. The other thing that you mentioned, as you were asking this question, the thought I had was, if you talk with the Indian private sector, you talk to people like Nandan Nilekani and others who are thinking about these problems in the case of India, I think a lot of the lessons from India and Nigeria can be shared with each other. So India and Nigeria should be like this, you know, in terms of this thing. Because India and Nigeria are both middle powers in this sense. You're not going to be able to catch up to the US or to China. And you don't have to in everything. But on the other hand, you want to sort of make sure that things like interoperability, where should you seek sovereignty? Where should you pray? You know, and where should you have a specific strategy of interoperability? You know, and I think this is something that one can you can actually learn a lot from. But there is no substitute for taking these technologies and infusing them into the economy. You go to any city in China, from Gansu in the interior to Hangzhou on the coast, you see that these standards or you see that these technologies have been infused. The same thing is true in India. If you find, for example, take a look at India's digital stack and so on. India has managed to make these technologies available to very poor people, for very small transactions of small, you know. So I think that the same thing has to be done. But China.
Lourdes.
Excuse me, sir. Can I just come in here quickly?
Okay, yeah.
Yes, we have the director of the IT department of the central bank. She's watching online and she sent her question. She's thanking the presenter, Dr. Gill, for your insightful presentation, and also to note that the CBN has started its AI implementation journey by establishing an AI policy and an AI strategy and having an AI playbook which has a 4-year roadmap. So the question now to you is, how should regulators ensure that AI models used in credit scoring, anti-money laundering, and financial supervision reflect local economic realities rather than assumptions embedded in models trained on advanced AI? So very important question.
You know, so I'm thinking she's a lawyer because she's asking a question to which she already knows the answer. I bet she knows a heck of a lot more about how to use AI in organizations like the central bank. But one of the things I think that so I actually heard an exchange like this in Portugal a few weeks ago between a central banker and the IMF. And because the IMF also has a strategy like this one, an AI strategy. And I think what the central bank should be doing is asking the IMF to intermediate between central banks what their AI strategies and all are. Because every bank is doing this, you know? So I would actually say you should, I bet you know the answer to this question. And I know that people at the IMF may actually be better placed to actually answer this question.
Okay, Indravi, thank you. Lourdes, final question.
Well, AI needs a lot of financing, needs from...
Lourdes is from Cornell University. She has a think tank there.
Yeah, I am the director of the Emerging Markets Institute at Cornell University. And so AI needs a lot of financing, and also countries need to see where they are going. Semiconductors, LLMs, etc., talent, etc. So the question is that in Africa, and tomorrow I'm moderating a panel about all the fragilities in many countries, so maybe here is an opportunity to collaborate. You cannot have everything in Nigeria. You suggested collaborating with India, but what about first collaborating within Africa in the framework of the African Common Free Trade Agreement? So how do you see that?
I completely agree with you, because actually, given the fact that I keep saying that AI is more context specific, so if a neighboring country actually ends up investing in adapting a technology that it gets from, let's say, the UK or from India and so on, then you don't have to invest nearly as much. You just need to collaborate with that country. It's absolutely right. So to the extent that agriculture has similarities, to the extent that economic structures have similarities, social norms, health conditions, etc. So to the extent that they are context specific, regional cooperation has to be a big, big part of this. And we actually mentioned this in the report. If you're disappointed with any of my answers, if you have a lot of questions in your thing, just wait a week and look at the report. It's really well done. It's long, it's long, but you can use AI to give you short versions of it.
So how do people get the report? Those who don't know the World Bank.
The report will be launched on the 4th or the 5th. On the 5th. It'll be launched on the 5th of August. And it'll be on the World Bank website. What we can do is we can send it to the Emerging Markets Forum right away, and you can share it with everybody.
So we can do that.
But Nigerians are very plugged in, so I know that the folks in Nigeria will immediately get it.
But if I may say, you know, we have lots of Nigerians here, but we have people from throughout Africa and people from outside Africa. So, you know, WDRs, the World Development Reports, are very, very good, if I may say so. And under your leadership, they become even better. So I really want them to.
There's actually one more thing that we do. We've started something called the Institute for Economic Development. The World Bank has this habit of taking things that are really valued by clients and axing them. You know, we had something called the World Bank Institute. Right. So what we've done is we've revived that in a smaller form. And one of the things that institute does is it actually makes available information like this AI, WDR, et cetera, in forms that people can tailor to themselves and so on. You know, you can listen to it, you can see it as a conversation between people. You can do it in 50 languages immediately. Okay, so that's what we try to do. So we use AI to also sort of make sure that we equalize access to knowledge, because what we found is that in places like the World Bank, we do all of this analysis, And people in rich countries are very quick to get that information. And people in poorer countries who probably need that information a heck of a lot more, they tend not to be. So I think for a long time, when we do analysis and we don't spend enough on engaging, like in places like this, we tend to exacerbate the inequality of information. And information is gold.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll have your permission to put the report on our website.
100%.
Wonderful. Good. So in the meet, you have a few minutes for your final thoughts. Please.
So I'm done and I'm very hungry. So let's.
So, thank you very much. You'll hear him again in the concluding sessions. Indermeet has agreed to share his thoughts on the entire forum tomorrow evening. But please, let's thank him again for coming all the way from Washington.
Please, another round of applause for Dr. Gill. Okay, Dr. Gill and Mr. Coley. Oh, okay. The pictures. Yes, yes. Governor, please, you may join them. The deputy governors also, please join the pictures. I thank you, Mr. Governor and deputy governors, for coming back to rejoin us. And yes, over there, yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for rejoining us. And not just rejoining us, I see that there was so much, rapt attention. Governor even led the way, asking the question about AI. When Dr. Gill was speaking, the 3 A's, the framework, adopt, adapt, and advance, I wrote it down here on my cue card. And since it's an AI session, while those pictures are going on, it's an AI session. So what I did too, I went on AI, specifically ChatGPT, whether it agreed with what Dr. Gill challenged us with. So I asked ChatGPT whether it agreed. Listen, this is not me. It said, absolutely. It agrees with Dr. Gill, adopt, adapt, and advance. Then I asked, can you replace the governor? He said, not a chance. I asked again, can you replace today's speakers? ChatGPT is saying, definitely not. Finally, I asked, can you replace the master of ceremony? Sincerely, me. It paused for a long time and then declined to answer. So you know what it is. So ladies and gentlemen, of course, artificial intelligence Okay. But of course, artificial intelligence is transforming how we work, and there are still some things being entrusted to human intelligence, and conversations like the ones we're having today are certainly one of them. Human leadership, human vision to ask the right questions, and most importantly, the value of thoughtful leadership. And I've always heard the governor of the central bank mention at many fora, thoughtful leadership, thoughtful leadership, thoughtful leadership. Thank you very much for reminding us that AI presents unprecedented opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our networking lunch. Like Dr. Gill said, it's time for us to go and eat and refuel. Please, the governor of the central bank, the deputy governors, and the guests will all move to the cafeteria for, yes. The governor will leave first. They would also accompany the governor to the cafeteria for lunch. All others will be right here in the hall. We'll have our lunch here. So, all right, as the governor is leaving, all invited guests, lunch is served at the cafeteria. Lunch is served at the cafeteria for all our invited guests. So please, you can proceed outside the auditorium. Yes, guests first. Our ushers will gladly lead you outside to the cafeteria. Then CBN staff, of course, our lunch would also be served here. And I just want to announce 1 hour. We have 1 hour for this lunch. Yes, we have 1 hour for this lunch, as well as a museum tour. Of course, we're in the Central Bank of Nigeria. We have a currency museum to give us the history of how Nigeria's currency has evolved. So there would be a museum tour. Once you also go outside, there will be personnel that will direct you to the currency museum, the CBN museum. Please, lunch is set for just 1 hour. After lunch, we'll still be back here for the icing on the cake and another panel session. There will be ushers outside that will direct us to the cafeteria. Enjoy your lunch, enjoy the museum experience, connect with your colleagues, of course, and ensure you're back to the hall promptly. Bon appetit.